Okay, so Favel Parrett is here with us. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Favel.
Favel. I've asked her 7 times and I still got it wrong. Favel is here, and I feel as though, Favel, your name has been in what I know for such a long time. You've been writing for a while, haven't you?
I think my first book was published in 2011,
Yeah.
so it's not that long.
Well, it's long.
It's
long.
I'm
It
old
is a long
now.
time. Anyway, she is an acclaimed author. Her debut, Past the Shallows, was shortlisted for the Miles Franklin Award and won the Dobie Literary Award. Her novel, There Was Still Love, was shortlisted for multiple awards and won the 220 Indie Book of the Year and Indie Book of the Year for Fiction. Her children's book, Wandi, was shortlisted for the 22 Indie Book Awards. Okay, so we do have a stellar lineup is what I'm trying to get. Now, Diane over here, who also didn't bring her book, right? Diane Connell, her first 2 books were published under the name of DJ Connell. Julian Corkle is a Filthy Liar was shortlisted for the Polari First Book Prize in the UK and has been adapted for screen. Her latest novel, Improbable Life of Ricky Bird, was published in April and is one of the most delightful books you'll read this year. So I have a team of people in the office, a team of passionate readers, and they told me to tell Diane that every person in the office loved the book.
Oh,
so there you go. I'm just passing that on, right? It's just what they said. Okay, so this panel is through their eyes, and it really is talking about using children and animals in fiction largely. And I'm going to start with Sofie because, you know, when we talk about, let's say, film and theatre, the 2 things they say to keep away from are children and animals. How do you feel about that in fiction?
Do you mean they say stay away from playing them or stay away from featuring them? Is that what you mean?
I think it's... I think they find it working with animals.
Working with them, of course, working with animals. That's
and
right.
children.
Yeah.
It
and children.
Can be prickly.
Well, the great thing about writing is you don't have to work with anyone.
That's exactly right. But do you think that your characters, whether they be animals or children, are prickly?
Are prickly? Not to me, no.
They behave?
They don't necessarily behave or play by the rules according to others, but they behave. We work together.
Yeah.
You spoke about that acting career. I did find that playing a 5-year-old came pretty naturally.
To you?
That pretty much tells you everything you need to know. There's really nothing more I need to say.
Yeah.
I played a 5-year. In fact, I worked for a theatre and education company for nearly a year in Tasmania, playing a 5-year-old child, touring all the schools throughout. I've done lots of that kind of work over the years, back in that other life.
It's interesting, you know, when I was thinking about, you know, some of the discussion points and what we were going to talk about today, and I was trying to remember what my favourite books were growing up, and obviously it was The Tale of Peter Rabbit, Beatrix Potter. I felt so much for those rabbits, like, you know. And another favourite was John Brown Rose and the Midnight Cat, and I've got a dog now called John Brown. Yes. People often ask me what's his first name and what's his surname, and I said, no, it's just all one, John Brown. But I think in talking to children sometimes, and to adults, that often difficult messages are easier when you're dealing with characters that are animals. I just want to recount a story that happened to me recently. I have 2 dogs, and one dog died a couple of years ago. George was his name, the one that died. And my little great-nephew, who was 7 at the time, I had to tell him I have them every Monday, and I had to tell him that George had died that week. And he said to me, after a couple of hours, he was kind of processing the information, walked away, and then he said to me, I think you'll find that George went to China. And I said, oh, China? And he said, not a great place for a little white dog to go, but I didn't tell him that. But as the day progressed, George, yeah, you can laugh about that. as the day progressed, George went to the airport, George bought tickets, George boarded a plane, and George went to China. And I thought, does he need the animal to process grief? Do you want to talk to me about that?
So, Wandi is actually a true story. And you might say to me, well, how can you say it's completely true? Because I write from Wandi's perspective. I work with Wandi. I work at a dingo sanctuary 2 days a week where Wandi now resides. Wandi's a true story because this little dingo cub, 5 weeks old, living with his mum and dad and probably siblings, was taken by a bird of prey. We don't know what, but we know he had talon marks in his back. We think he was taken by a wedge-tailed eagle, the creator spirit Bunjil. So here he is. That's a death sentence for a 5-week-old cub who's about that big. And somehow little Wandi got himself out of that, landed in someone's yard in a town called Wandillagong, which is why he's called Wandi. She didn't know whether he was a fox, a dog, what? Took him to the vet, 4 little white paws, white tip on the tail, furred ears, eyes on the side, slanted, dingo. At that time, 2 years ago, Parks Victoria, the Department of the Environment and the Australian government in general had decided that Victorian alpine dingoes are extinct in the wild. Wandi's DNA test proved that completely wrong. He's wild, his family are wild. We know they're out there. He's a massive sign of hope, or symbol of hope for us to get dingoes protected in New South Wales and Victoria. Little alpines. So that's why I've written this book.
Okay, all right, Diane, we'll move on to children. Firstly, can you tell us a little bit about your book?
So my book is set in London. I was living there 4 years ago. I've been living in Europe for 20 years or so. And Ricky Bird is a storyteller. She's a young person, 12 to 13. So she's still attached to that wonderful big spirit of children, the big wild imagination that a young person, a child has, where anything's possible, but you have no control or power. And then she finds herself ripped out from where she's been living and put somewhere alien. She loses touch with her father and the garden because she's very attached to the garden. I don't know if any of you have that experience when you were young. An absolute vivid, alive attachment to growing things and what that does to you inside. I don't know, I had that when I was young. And so that Ricky still has that, but she's pulled away from that garden, she's pulled away from her father, everything's new, and suddenly her little brother gets ill and her mother is absent a lot. So we've got a young person, very vulnerable, in an alien place with none of the footholds that defined her. I've moved around a lot. I know what it's like to be in an alien place where you don't have that sense of who you are, the identity. And for a young person with no power or control, then we have a dynamite situation. But she has a special ability to tell stories. And through her stories, she attempts to express what's going on. I don't know, that's the nutshell.
Okay, I'm going to refer to my notes here, but do you think your own experience, well, all of us, I guess, and any one of us can answer this, your own experiences, childhood experiences really kind of come to play when you're writing from a perspective of a child? Because, there's this whole conversation at the moment about cultural appropriation. I mean, I know that it doesn't refer to adults and children, but, who knows what's going to happen in the future. Do you want to talk about that, Sofie?
Does somebody who writes in a very young voice, are they drawing on their own childhood experiences?
If you're writing about children,
I think you are. I think you are drawing on some lived experience in certain ways. So I think, speaking personally, you'll understand, I think, the emotional truth of your character, even if everything else is imagined. Their setting, their family, their story, but yet there is something that I will know, or I will know it emotionally. Yeah, I mean, I don't ask myself any of these questions when I sit down to do it, So I don't think of a readership. I don't think, I really just do what wants to happen and what comes naturally. I don't have, when I sit down to do it, I don't have, all I know is I feel like being in character, and that's the character that I want to be in.
So when you sit down to write, do you know that you're going to write a fiction, an adult story or a children's story? How does that kind of work? Like, firstly, tell me your approach to writing. And is it that you've had that story in your head and that's been going around for some time, I've got to get that down, or I'm sitting down and trying to come up with a story?
No, it's not sitting wanting to come up with a story. It'll be a voice. It'll be a voice first. And I will know pretty early on what kind of challenges that voice faces. And that will decide also very early on. I'll also know this won't suit a younger readership. But that will be as far as I go in terms of considering an audience or a readership at all. I'll just loosely know this is not going to be appropriate. And it's not an interesting question really even for me to ask myself. I'll just know it in a very sort of backgroundy way, then I'll get on with the task of working inside that voice.
Yeah, do you want to talk to that?
For me, all of my books are from a child's perspective, all of them, all 3 adult novels, and this is from a dingo perspective, but definitely drawing on my emotions. I never know whether it's for adult or for YA, and that I just leave that up to the publishers because that's not my place. My place is to tell a story from character, and I also think that we can't assume that it's a YA or a child's book just because the main characters are children. And anyway, who cares? It's all great storytelling. Like that, for me, there's no real crossover between YA and adult. It's just good writing.
When I was little, there wasn't even a genre YA.
And
I mean, you know, I used to work on a shop floor and it was either adults or children, very clearly.
And for Wandi, it's for 8 to 12-year-olds. There's some pretty harsh scenes of dingoes dead on a tree but it can be read to children or read from any age. And there's 80-year-olds that have told me they loved it. So it's, again, I just wrote it.
Do you think when we're talking about, and see, I'm not referring to my notes because I think that that's a very interesting point, that when we've got characters that are animals, can we get away with more? Like, can we present more complex ideas to children perhaps because it's an animal?
I struggled with, so the true reality of where alpine dingoes are at is so absolutely horrific. So right now in New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland, you can kill a dingo and get a $120 bounty. You can poison any dingoes you want. There's 1080 being dumped en masse all the time, aerial 1080. And 1080 kills a lot of wildlife. In New Zealand, they use it to kill possums. It's banned all over the globe. Australia and New Zealand, the only 2 countries that still use this horrific poison. And animals, it takes them 2 days to die, and for the last 24 hours, they scream. And so if you've ever seen a fox that's eaten 1080, even though foxes are bad in Australia, you'll never use that poison again. There's different ways, there's better ways. Dingoes are a way to control foxes, actually. So it's interesting, we've created this problem. Those issues, how do I deal with that with 8 to 12? Through Wandi's eyes and awareness and sadness. He's missing his mum and dad. There's resilience here. He's on this long journey to become a really famous dingo and to save alpine dingoes from extinction. When he sees dingoes dead on a tree, dingoes can hear heartbeats from 25 metres, so he knows they're not alive. Then he thinks, I'm going to be shot. He's been told that the human animal is dangerous to dingoes. So there's this moment, and then he's not. There's a kind human there saying, this is terrible, and the kind human is crying about the dead dingoes. So it's a real moment of shock and horror, but it's done with some kindness as well and understanding. It's difficult balance, right? Because kids can tolerate a lot. Kids understand, a lot of kids understand death. Maybe they've lost a pet, maybe they've lost a grandparent, Maybe they've lost a friend.
Maybe their dog's gone to China.
Yes. They can understand more than we often think. They can cope with a lot more than we think as well.
What do you think, Diane? Talk to me about children and child characters. How much do you think that a reader can cope with in terms of...
I was just, when you said, Favel, that young people can cope with a lot, I remember standing with my parents and my mother saying to my father, well, once they're over the age of 7, you have to watch what you say because they understand it. And I was under 7 and thinking, I already got it, you know. So, yes, absolutely, young people can understand a lot. And we were talking about what we draw from our personal experience. And I've just quickly, I've lived all over the world. I've lived in big chunks of time in Tokyo, in London, and Paris, and now Sydney, and also I was born in New Zealand. But the vault of treasures is always my childhood. It's always that where I learned relationship, where I learned empathy, where I learned compromise, where I learned the dynamics of relationship, which is what I put into my books. And that's if I have empathy and compassion, it's from childhood, or competitiveness, or all those, the small, ugly things we have, and also the big things we have, I learned in childhood. And I hope that that's what I bring to my writing. And there was something else I was going, young people, I think, having a young protagonist, what I attempt to do, yes, I have a young character, but it's through the eyes of an innocent that I try to convey something about the misdeeds of adults. So my book is for adults, but it's like, there are many books that have a young character. They are the observer and, unfortunately, the recipient of bad behavior, and because they have no power, it doesn't mean that they don't see and understand things, but they're silenced because of their lack of power and because it benefits others for them to be silent. So I think that works quite well in a story when you're talking, when you're expressing something about what we do as adults. I don't know if
I think that was brilliantly articulated. Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to go back. One of the things that I like to talk to authors about, and as I said earlier, we have a podcast, Stories Behind the Story, and I've probably spoken to over 400 authors by now, but particularly the fiction authors, I have noticed that there is a trend. Now, I don't have data to support that other than gut feeling, but you guys can either agree or disagree. Usually I find writers of fiction have come from some kind of adversity in their childhood, and it doesn't have to be negative adversity. Like some fiction writers lived in remote properties, and they didn't see anybody and they were great readers. Or some moved around a lot as children and didn't have a home and didn't have friends to connect with and were great readers and came to writing. Does that ring true for anybody here?
I think so. No, but okay. I suppose I had a sparkling childhood because I had a big family and we didn't move around. I moved around as an adult, a fool that I was. But as a child, I had stability, but I had a very fierce, wild mother, and I had a Protestant, like a Scottish immigrant father. And so I had that dynamic, but we had this wildness because we lived on the land and then we didn't, and I have an absolute connection to nature and animals from my childhood. But I think having that wild spirit, and there was something about my mother that was anything goes, but I think that helped me. And I think perhaps if I have empathy or compassion for things, for other people's suffering, that was from childhood. But no, I didn't have adversity as a child. I just had wildness.
Wildness. Well, yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be negative. Anything for you, Sofie?
No, well, I'm just spellbound by the way you describe it again. No, I did suffer adversity as a young child, and I suppose a lot of that is being worked through in my fiction, and but like Diane, there was also a wildness, and I did discover early on the comforting aspects of nature and animals. My parents were both larger than life, Also it was anything goes, and there was a lot of moving around, and a lot of colour, and it also sparkled. So in me, I suppose it's all a perfect storm, perfect storm. There was a lot of books. I was lucky enough to, I had a good education. I was inspired by teachers, but alongside of that, there was also trauma, which I think finds its place in my work. But the wonderful thing about writing is that you have a lot more control. So even though, absolutely, as you've articulated, we're telling the stories often of those without power or control, we now have power and control. They do hold characters without power and control, and very innocent characters do shine a very bright light on the misdeeds of the adults.
Did you find solace in reading?
I found solace in reading.
Yeah.
I found great solace in reading. And as Diane said, animals continue to feature. I keep meeting them again and again. I mean, we have to watch our tendencies in our fiction, don't we? Or we risk repeating ourselves, but I keep seeing it. Animals keep coming, whether it's the cattle in Infinite Splendours, or the dog that Jimmy meets in Eye of the Sheep, or the chickens in The Choke. They just keep featuring and keep coming up and providing great comfort and release to characters in trouble.
What about you, Kay?
So I'm from a working class family. Books weren't in the house. Mum and Dad did read to us, I think. I also am, I was like a remedial English student, and I was such a slow reader that books caused me trauma.
Wow.
So the text for school, I'd be up till 3 o'clock in the morning trying to keep up and just bawling my eyes out. And it was a librarian in year 12 changed my life. She could see that I was hated them. And I was a really good science student, so I got into uni for physics, but I couldn't go because I was already living out of home and working. And that's all good, it's worked out great. Thank you. So this librarian took me aside, and I was a goth, this really serious kid, loner, already living out of home. And she said, I think I've got some books that you might like. And it was all the old cat classics. It was like Wuthering Heights was the first one. And even though I was a slow reader, I just like,
that's incredible.
Oh my God, this is... And I started reading a book a week.
Oh, wow.
On the public transport to get to and from school. And then I could afford to buy a second-hand book once a week. I feel a bit teary now. I still have them all. What they meant, because I couldn't afford to buy new books. But those old penguins, the orange... oh my God, so that librarian, I'm so grateful. That was the start of reading.
Amazing.
And the power of teachers and the power of teacher librarians. I mean, unbelievable. Thank you for sharing that. That was just absolutely beautiful. Would you like to add to that at all?
I would like to say, Favel, we didn't have books either. My father thought I'm a ditch digger's daughter, and he bought encyclopedias. But who's going to read an encyclopedia as a kid,
The Britannica.
He didn't understand how the novel, how fiction explodes a child's imagination, and how it opens you up to so many things. And I am still today a slow reader. Yeah. And it's not because they were bad parents, they didn't understand what fiction did to a young mind.
Recently, pre-COVID, everything's pre-COVID, I was invited to speak at a festival in Bali. I think it's called the Ubud Writers Festival. And I was on a teen panel, and it was largely YA, and it really wasn't my strong point. But, they invited me, and I decided to go because I'd never been to Bali. But it was the most interesting panel, terrific lineup of writers, but it wasn't the writers that were terrific. It was the people, the young people in the audience, to the point where I was so emotional. All these young people kept coming in, and they were absolutely in awe of all of us. And I then asked the question why. I turned the questions from the panel to the kids way before question time, just trying to understand why there were so many people in there. And you know, they said to me that they were the first generation of readers. So a lot of them were from Bali or from Java. Yeah, so you know this. I didn't know that until the time. And they were readers and their parents weren't. So their parents couldn't understand their love of fiction. Their parents couldn't understand that they're addicted to Harry Potter or they're addicted to some of those YA books out there at the moment. And they were ferocious readers, and they were the first generation of readers.
Wow.
It was astounding. Yeah.
Amazing.
But this is the power of story. It is what you three are doing to people's lives. It's fantastic. Okay, all right, so that was just a memory I had there. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about your writing process. We touched on it with Sofie. How is it, Fav, that you think, where does your story come from? Does it come from a seed of an idea? Do you have it formulated? Tell me where it all starts.
It's very similar to Sofie with my other novels. It's character first or place. So Tasmania features a lot in my trying to work out that place for little me, I think. Wandi's different. So I work with Wandi. This was a great story. My boss is 80 years old. She's been running the sanctuary for 30 years. She spends 7 days a week, all day, every day, working, advocating for dingoes. And we are the last viable genetic pool of alpine dingoes in Australia. We work with a lot of other zoos and sanctuaries as well to make sure that if we burn down, there's alpine dingoes in other sanctuaries because they're just not safe in the wild. She said, Favel, you've got to write this book. And I said to her, I think it should be for 8 to 12-year-olds because they don't have all the prejudice and misinformation about dingoes that adults do. I can't really combat all the misinformation that we've had for like forever. But kids will learn about dingoes and know that the Australian dingo, Canis dingo, is the smartest canid dog on the planet by a long way. It can beat a wolf by minutes in this special intelligent test. It's a Perspex box of like all these different tools that they have to try and learn to get the treat at the end. And that was done by Harvard University, so it's like proven. But they're amazing. Apex predator, why aren't we proud of them? So my boss said, Faye, we've got to write this book. So there was a lot of pressure on me, and it also put a lot of pressure on myself because these guys are so close to extinction that like, they could be gone next year, the year after it's that. And then they'll be gone like the Tasmanian tiger, will be gone forever. So I just decided I have to save all dingoes on the whole, in the whole of Australia. So I put a lot of pressure on myself, and it was hard. It's the hardest book I've ever done. It's the most important thing I've ever done as well.
Was it a hard sell to your publisher?
No, I just said, because I work with Wandi and I sent them a little bit of what I'd written, they were just like, yeah. And then they did this beautiful hardback. And Zoe Ingram did the illustrations, and she's from England, and she kept making Wandi look like a dog. And my boss would absolutely kill me because it's one thing it's not a dog, it's not a dog. So I had to keep going back to her and say, like, no, the ears have to have fur inside, the eyes have to be more almond and on the side. I drove her insane, I think. But she did such a good job. I couldn't be happier.
Okay. All right, over to you, Diane. So you've written, is it 2 books?
Three
books,
now.
yeah, 3 books. And what is your writing style? Is it the idea? Is it because you've?
It's sort of both. It's the
It's
character and the idea. It's usually they come together because it's a character, usually a character in some sort of peril, isn't it? You know, for me, that's how I write a book. But I also then my characters they're usually a little bit odd. They're misfits somehow, or they're a little bit perhaps special. And through these beleaguered characters with something to offer, and because I write with humour, I think. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but
No, we do agree
there's
with
humour. I write in a kind of funny way, but
Yeah.
it's the soil, if you like, is serious, but the way I present it is with humour. So it's that funny thing I do. I think of an idea that's perhaps sad, funny, but hopeful, and the character. There's a certain point in when you're writing. You start off with an idea, and I start off with a big head. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. By the end of the book, my ego's like that, and I'm out the door, and my character has there's a point where the character takes over, and the story is coming rather from me, through me, and the character has assumed a life of his or her own, and they're telling my story for me, and I am humbled by it somehow. And it sounds pretentious, but it's something like that. If you really give of yourself to writing, it takes over you, and you have to do it with a certain integrity, I suppose. I try not to fudge things. I try not to, you know what I mean, try to say, that'll do, because it takes me years to write a book, and I edit. So I like to make something accessible, but something that is authentic or original and, I don't know, has integrity. I'm not saying I succeed, but that is what I endeavour to do.
Yeah. I've heard that so many times with speaking to authors, that they just say, well, I didn't really want the character to do that, but the character did. So I just let the character go.
Yep.
Does that happen, Sophie? I can see you're nodding.
No, it's a little bit different.
For you?
I have heard writers say that
Yeah.
suddenly the character
Yeah.
will, hijack the story. No, it doesn't feel that way. What does it feel like? It's hard to find the words for it. You're one and the same, and you're not at the very same time. Is it a dance between the two of you? Yeah, I can't find the words. It's deeply intuitive, but yeah, it's hard to know. Are they me, or am I controlling them? I'm not sure. It does feel like it's coming through. It does feel like it's coming through me, but at the same time, they're not controlling me either.
Okay, I was speaking with, and now his name's gone, I can't remember, but it will come to me. I was speaking with a crime fiction author who's written something like 20 books, and he told me that every time he sits down to write a book, it's as hard as the first. Is that right?
Of course.
Yes. It really is. And so for me, I write out of order, and I don't know the story, and that was how I wrote my first novel, Past the Shallows, and I found that really challenging and hard, trying to put it together and form a story. So for my second book, I thought, well, I'm going to do it totally differently. I'm going to map out the whole story on a storyboard. I've seen other authors maybe do, and start from page 1 and end at the end. And I wrote about 45,000 words like that, and when I read it, it was like someone else wrote it. It had no heart and no connection at all. It was pretty bad. And I had to just put it in a drawer, and I had to go back to, okay, I need to know nothing and not know what I'm doing and write out of order and work it out like the reader is working it out maybe, and write way more than I need so that I can end up with something cohesive that makes people feel is what I'm trying to do, or makes me feel. So yeah, it's never easy, and it's always hard, and we never know what we're doing is how I feel. I never know what I'm doing.
Lee Child, I just remembered the name of the author that told me that. He's like, it's as hard. I've said this before for those of you that listen to my podcast. It's got to be the hardest job, one of the hardest jobs, being an author, because you spend, years in a room writing, and then you spend, months being edited and published. It requires a whole team to get that book published and out there. And then once it gets out there, everyone has an opinion. I'm just like, why would you want to do that to yourself? It's very difficult. Do you read reviews?
Not anymore. Yeah, I can feel my husband's response in my head if and when I,
Yeah.
complain about any difficulties in the industry, and he said, you're not working down a coal mine,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
nobody's asking for it. It's the best job in the world.
Yeah.
But
Yes,
believe
I
me, Cheryl, I agree with all,
Yeah.
I've been talking with Hannah and all other writers about
Yeah.
the various struggles. It's
Yeah.
scary having a book come out. The thing you do all that loving work for, that it's so exhilarating, and it is an act of devotion, and then coming out is a whole other beast, and beast is not a bad word for it, even though at the very same time we're grateful to have a book come out, but we're not working down a coal mine, and we are addressing that need in the purest way, aren't we? And not everyone gets to do that
Well, look,
kind
you
of
know,
work. That's pretty true.
Look, and you aren't working down a coal mine, but you are doing a job. I mean, the remuneration is woeful, mostly. So anyway, we're not going to complain about it. I was just kind of talking about what I think you put yourselves through.
Yeah.
And also I've spoken to authors that, they've been rejected 100 times. I mean...
Yeah.
Actually, I was speaking to Damon Galvert, who wrote The Promise, the Booker Prize winner, and he lost count of the amount of times he was rejected. It's just extraordinary. So it's really a challenge, really, at every point. But I just want to say this. I was speaking to Charlotte Wood recently, and I recorded a podcast with her, and I want to know how you guys feel about this, because it was the first time I'd heard this. She said once the book is finished and once it's out there, it doesn't belong to her anymore. It belongs to the reader. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, you were saying you don't think of the reader when you I kind of do, because for me it's like a conversation with my readers, and I do think of my readers. So that's as I'm working on it, and I do work in a kind of coal mine, and I'm always tormented by, I'm not doing enough, I'm not good enough, I'm useless, it's all going to fail, I don't know why I'm doing this. That I live with that all the time, but at the same time I've got a kind of rhino skin as well. I've just got to I ring fence what I do, because everybody's got an opinion about that I'm doing nothing all day or whatever. It's like that. But when I write, I do write for my readers. I absolutely do. I think of you. I try to make things... I'm trying to give you a message. I'm trying to give you a story that's going to open you up to... As I was saying actually earlier, it's an interactive process, a book. So I'm giving you something. You're going to take it from me, and you're going to interpret it, and your imagination is going to create whatever it does with whatever I give you. And hopefully what I'm trying to say will somehow, my truth, I suppose, or the truth of the characters, will come through to my readers, and you will, and that's my gift to you, I suppose. But yes, once my book's out there, it's up to you to decide whether you love it or hate it. And it's a funny business, books, because once it's out there, everybody has an opinion, and sometimes those opinions are crushing. But in terms of reviews, that's great. Usually, if you've got someone who knows about books and things, that's fine. But we just have to take it. I give you my book, it's up to you what you do with it. And so, yes, it's not mine anymore.
Do you feel the same, Sophie?
Well, when I'm writing the book, I feel it's different. It's different. I'm not aware of or I try not to be. In fact, in hours of doubt or days of doubt, I say, this is absolutely just for me. Maybe I never need to share this with anybody at all. It is the safest place. And that doesn't mean that I'll still have to craft it to within an inch of its life. The standards remain the same, but it's private, and that makes me feel comfortable and free. And of course I understand, one day I'll give it to the publisher, but I'll even label the document on my computer something like my private rubbish.
Wow.
Really. That I'll say, look, I'll give it a year. I've got a year. I don't ever have to show anybody. And that way, the work can be very intimate and very vulnerable and very private and very rich and playful and that's how I do it. But I'm not thinking I'll make it exciting here because a reader will love that now. But it's like if I were composing a piece of music, I can feel where it becomes very full and very loud and there's chaos, so it must rest. Then it must rest. Not because I'm thinking, oh, the reader will love a little beat here. It's me that needs it's the piece. The piece will be asking for a rest, and then it will need to, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And do you feel when it's out there then that it belongs to the reader?
Then it's gone. It's gone. It's an
gone.
entirely different thing that's hard to relate to. You have to pull. Perhaps that's why I didn't bring a copy. I have to pull my attention.
Maybe that's the...
and when I do read it, it's a little bit. Few words too many there. It's sort of like it really has sailed. It doesn't. It's really. I'm still invested in. I've got an ego and I'm still invested in how it goes, but in a very different way to the investment when it's alive. It's not, when you're creating it, it's like a thing that's growing and it's really rich. Then it's not anymore. I feel bad saying that about it, but it's
But
like
that's
it's
what
gone.
I think what Charlotte was saying, then that's it. It's over to you and I'll keep writing. You guys enjoy the story.
I don't even think of the people.
Yeah, right.
I don't even think of the people because I'll just get anxious about it.
Yeah.
I'm not, I'll keep going, but I don't think I've got a rhino skin. I just keep going and just keep, it's a complex business, isn't it?
Do you want to add to that, Fav?
I can understand what you guys are saying, but like yesterday I read from my first novel, Past the Shallows, because it's being studied by HSC students here in New South Wales, and I like burst into tears in one bit, and I didn't expect it, and it was because of my character Harry. So he is still, and there's one bit of that book that I still can't read. I won't read it. I get too upset. I still feel like my grandma's flat is in there. I can still, when I read that bit of me going upstairs. So I still am really attached to the books, but they've gone off, and then other people will tell me about the characters, and that's great.
It kind of doesn't surprise me that you're still attached to the book. I've got a sense that you're that kind of storyteller. Now, I think that we are going to take questions now. We're going to throw it over to the audience, and perhaps you just say your name and then who you'd like the question directed to. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Up over the front.
Thanks for the session and advice. My question is more to Diane. It's like, as we say, we are our best and worst enemies. And how do you deal with self-doubt, especially when it's your first book? And does the story support you at that point? And maybe you think, oh, it's not good enough, or it's never going to be good enough. Do you ever get that, and how do you overcome it?
That's my life. I'm always, I live with that. I live with that riding on my shoulders, always. And in a way, it's a motivator. It motivates me because I can be I'm an anxious person. I think, although I've got this macho image, I'm quite anxious inside. I live with anxiety. It's a motivator. You don't want to get it out of control, and you just have to sort of somehow channel that and use that energy. Just the thing with the book, just keep going. Just keep going, but also be honest, and don't sort of try to fudge it and think, because if you fudge something, if you say good enough, I'll just stick that in, your reader will see that. And then they will, and then it'll poison the book. It's the same as when you're writing. You write with a certain integrity, so that you feel not pride, but you feel you've been honest or earnest about your writing. So you've just got to keep going and just keep saying, "I'll do my best." And the thing is, keep pushing yourself, drive yourself forward, because I'm assuming you're talking about your own writing process, and then edit like the wind. That's the thing. And you might I've thrown out half a book before, like Favel, you've done that. You throw out stuff. You've got to be able to throw out, kill your babies. I worked in advertising for a long time. You've got to do it. You've got to slaughter them. When they don't work, you hold on to something because of pride, and you've got to kill it so that you can move on. And then there's always another way to write it. That's what I think.
And we call that practice as well, you know.
I beg your pardon?
In other occupations, that's called practice.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess so.
Yeah. Okay, any more questions?
Yeah, my name is Ula, and I think my question is directed to either Sofie or Favel. I'm dying to ask this question to a children writer because I'm writing a semi-autobiography, and my characters start as a child. As hard as you remember events, but how do you place yourself in the emotional frame of a child, and how do you think it's believable for a child?
It's a good question.
Gosh, for me, with this book, it was smells and tastes. So I found a jar of gherkins from Czechoslovakia, where my grandma's from, and I hadn't tasted them since I was about 16. And as soon as I bit into one, I just was back in this flat, and I mean back there, and I had to write that down. So it came from, it was really full on. I was that kid again. So even if, like, looking at photographs, or if there's any music that can take you back there, or smells, or a place, I went back to the flat, and the lovely lady who lives there now let me inside, and I was like crying my eyes out, and you know, she just thought I was a crazy person, but the stairwell still smelt the same. So I really put myself back there, and inside I was that kid. And of course I'm still an adult, but we all have that kid inside us all the time. I do anyway.
Mainly, I think what Favel says, that kid is already in there, in all of us. So, I mean, I suppose it's closer to some than others. I'll grant everyone that, but yeah, it's within us. It's a very, like Diane, you said, all of your writing, that is the well. And I think that's just what it is to be human. So it is there for you to access. And so I suppose, yeah, there might be triggers or photographs or tastes or, I mean, for me personally, well, I suppose if I've got an instinct or a desire to write a character, then the work is already in process. The very fact that the desire is there means there must be something that wants to come. Yeah, and so sentence by sentence, detail by detail, that will begin to emerge. And once you've been with a character for a number of weeks, you know so many more of the sentences that make their world.
And
So,
one other thing I'd just like to add, and Sophie
Yeah.
would understand, I'm sure,
yeah?
some of this stuff it brings up great discomfort. And we want to run away from that. We want to turn Netflix on. We want to like run away. Oh my God, there's stuff coming up. If you can sit at the desk, and a lot of writing is actually making yourself sit there for 5 hours a day, staring at a wall, and I'm not going to run away from this. It's so horrible, and you want to do anything else. If you can sit through that, sometimes one sentence will come up that is like the true emotion or the whatever, and that can start you off in a course. But often it feels horrible, like you just, I want to do anything else with this.
But something that occurred to me when you were talking about how when you tried to make it ordered, you tried to move from the beginning of the book, because I understand totally the inconvenience of trying to put the mess together. But something that I've been thinking lately, you know, and I wonder if all writers work with this, there is the heavy hand of control. You know, that heavy hand of control is quite deadening. And you've got to remove it even if it's a lot messier and more painful. The heavy hand of control doesn't make the kind of books you want to read, and it's not really, it's not art, and it's not rich or authentic in the same way. So, yeah, it's a tricky thing because you can feel yourself imposing it. Would you agree with that? You can, because you have an idea. You have an intellect that has an idea. I want this to happen to my character, and so you'll impose it and move them around like a piece on and you wonder why. And then a sentence will come along or a moment in the process which will drop you into something else, that's disordered, unpredictable, more
Playful.
surprising.
Playful. You said it
Maybe
before.
playful, maybe sad, and then you'll have taken the work to a whole new place, and then that sets a new standard, and then you'll read all that heavy-handedness, you'll say, it's got to go, it's got to go. Yeah, but I suppose that's got to be respected, because all of it is bringing you slowly, by unpredictable step by step, towards the thing that wants to emerge, which is it's an interesting thing, because it is a little out of control. So it's very contradictory. You know, writing stories, we do have control, but at the same time, it is about writing into the place that is a bit less not in control, anyway.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Just
good
keep
answers.
going though.
Yeah,
Just
keep going is the main thing. And everyone this afternoon has used those 2 words. And they're pretty much the only mantra I ever can really come back to, both in life and in writing, is keep going.
And
KG.
But isn't creativity?
Yeah, I
but
like
isn't
it.
creativity? There's a certain chaos to creativity.
Yes, that's it.
And so it's when you try
Yeah.
when you force your hand,
That's it.
you force a form, or you force your
Yeah,
hand.
yeah.
What you do is you end up with something tight and contrived that has no
Exactly.
life.
That's
So they've got to
exactly it.
allow playfulness and chaos, but you've
Yeah.
also got to guide it.
Yeah.
And you shape it, I suppose. So-
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Rings true. Yeah. We got a question?
I recently saw an article, or read an article about using animals, the death of animals, or the abuse, or them getting hurt in writing and movies from an ethical point of view. And I just wondered if you had anything to say about that. Does that article sound familiar at all? It's very recent. It could have been on TV or something I saw, but it raised something in my mind that we always use, dog gets kicked, and it affects the reader in a certain way, and is that ethical? So, not really a question, but
It's an interesting, it's kind of
Yeah,
thorny
it
and
is.
interesting what you're saying. It is interesting, because
And if you're thinking about, like, when I was writing Wandi, I was like, what's the archetype of a story like this? So very early on, there's a tragedy. So I kept thinking about Bambi, and that was like my first. And I mean it though. That's my first visual movie like that, where there was like, oh my God, this animal's mum got killed at the start of the movie. I think that's what happened. And it's like The Lion King is similar, right? So tragedy, and then through adversity makes it a new family or home or place. For Wandi, it's a true story, but I used that arc to sort of give me some kind of scaffold. And is that ethical? It's hard, I don't know. But
It's different in your
more
case, 'cause
different
it
for
is
me.
true,
But
yeah.
if this was made up, it is the Bambi archetype.
But isn't that life also? It's
Yeah.
life.
Maybe it's life,
And
and
we
maybe
are-
story.
we are
all
telling-
story is
yeah.
from life, so that's why
Yeah.
it's an archetype.
So
because
there's
it's
censorship. That's right.
I don't know. I can't answer that question, but it's such an interesting
It is,
question.
it
It's
is.
really fascinating. That's a PhD. Someone should do a PhD.
And it's actually not straightforward.
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
No, it's not at all. It's a great question. I want to read that article now. I'll just, I guess if we just Google animal ethics using in story, yeah.
We'll find it.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
Time for more
Oh.
questions.
We do have time for more questions.
Question, one more.
Anybody got anything? We've got one at the back.
Hi, my name's Sally. Recently finished Infinite Splendors, Sophie. It's just an amazing book, and it stays with me a lot. I just want to know why you wrote it, or where it came from. You know, like it was something. It was something disturbed me a lot. But just such a beautiful book too.
Thank you. Well, it did begin that day with a voice. I remember when it began. And so, I can think of conscious reasons that, the sparks to the kindling of the fire. I wanted to break out. It was a feeling of wanting to go where I oughtn't go. there's a lot of energy in going where one oughtn't, isn't there? Opening a door you're not meant to open. I'd recently read a Cormac McCarthy novel where he goes into some pretty spooky sort of territory. That was the first inclination, but very quickly it became neither of those things at all. He became the protagonist. I was imbued with a great deal of... I respected him, and I loved him, and I cared for him, but I didn't predict any of it happening quite like that. So on that day that I began, just sitting in a cafe, I wanted the energy of of going into an older person's voice where I'm not meant to go. There's a lot of... That felt gritty and a bit exciting, and then... but as to why, I don't know. I don't really know. I know that it did a great deal for me. You know, it was extremely gratifying to do it. It was really soothing. So that's odd because, you know, a lot of people had quite a stressed response. And my husband said, "Yeah, Sophie, what did you expect?" I was like, how come people keep, like, being shocked? So, because for me it was, but then I'm the author that knows what's going to happen, you know, so it's not as scary. But so I found it really... So books function differently for the reader than they do for the writer.
Absolutely.
So it's really soothing, and it made me feel like I had company, beautiful company all the time. And when you work through, when difficult things happen in writers' books, it feeds them. I think it's doing something that they probably can't even articulate. It's doing something for them. So I don't know. It did that for me. It immersed me in the mountain landscape. But it's a mystery. It's a mystery. So, you know, writers come onto panels and give talks, but really, aren't we always just, what's that word? Is it not poking in the dark? Help me. Feeling in the...
Stumbling.
Staggering.
Yeah.
Stumbling, staggering.
You know, trying to find words for that which is really a little beyond words, ironically. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be writing the books. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
It's a bit mysterious. We're doing our
Well,
best.
it's not an exact science, is it? I mean,
it's not an exact science.
No. Sorry, did you
No. Sophie was looking at me, and I think there is... I think, you know, I don't want to sound pretentious, but there's something of the miraculous in writing, because you'll be writing something and then something will come in and that will just work beautifully with your character, and it will allow another thing to happen and allow the story to flower, and it's this mystery of creativity and art.
Alchemy, perhaps.
Yeah, when we're artists, well, writing is art, and when we write, we have that as it's that chaotic process. Within a structure, there's, you know, if you have skills, I suppose, you've got the structure and you've got the road, and then what you put on that is something chaotic. And
I guess for us as readers, it's when the craft and the story come together. That's our alchemy, really. Yeah, when you're reading and it just flows so perfectly.
And unfortunately, we have to have the feeling the whole time that it will probably all just go terribly wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you have that, Favel, but, you know, like the whole lot's just going to fall in a heap, game over.
Yeah. Regardless of how many times you've done it.
Yeah.
We're out of time. Okay, we are out of time. Can we please give a huge thank you to these wonderful authors. Do you know, I work in a business where I'm speaking to writers every single day. Every single day of my year is talking to a writer. And I am always surprised, I am always intrigued, and I love the story, and I'm never bored. Never. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl.
And we thanked our three authors, Diane, Sophie and Favel, but we must thank Cheryl, our moderator.
Thank you.